All right.
All right. I think this is the first time that I've done the recording, so it says it is. Hello, everyone. Welcome to, I guess, the fifth installment of the Sophisticated Shut-In. Today is the 14th of April, 2020. We are in, I want to say, the 22nd day of the shelter-in-place order due to the coronavirus. I'm sure, as most of you have immediately noticed, today's format is a little bit different. Rather than me musing and waxing about some sartorial topic, I have decided to invite my very good friend, Russell Firestone, in for a digital chat. Russell and I met about 2.5 years ago when I was looking for a new barber. And I was doing some research and I came upon the website for his barbershop and started reading some bios of the people working there. And I noticed that his bio contained numerous mentions of words such as classic, timeless, things like that. And that immediately resonated with me. So I went in for a haircut. I sat down in the chair. He asked if I wanted anything different than what I was already, donning as far as hairstyle. I'm like, nope, just this, but shorter. And that's probably the last time we really talked about hair. I've been going to him ever since. He has become a very, very close friend. And we share a lot of the same passions for those classic styles, affectations, and things like that. He is one of the sharpest dressed men I know. And today I want to essentially record a conversation with him that is more or less going to be, I think, a slice of our life. We don't have too much of a script here. This isn't an interview, but when we get together, we tend to talk about things that relate very much to classic menswear, along with classic lifestyle. So here we go. So Russell, welcome.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to start because your focus, both as a professional and in your non-professional life, is on things that you deem are classic and timeless, clothing, lifestyle, pursuits in general. I guess I just kind of wanted to start by asking you what that means to you. Like, if you had to loosely define what it is to be classic, and how it impacts the way that you go about your life, both in clothing and just life in general.
Well, that's, it can look a little bit different for everyone, but for me, probably one of the things that I noticed early on was I was attracted to more traditional things or traditional pursuits, lifestyles, that sort of thing. But another thing in particular that I noticed was I was big on enriching my daily life. I figure, you go through life day by day. Everyone does. No one can escape that. So the more you can find ways to enrich your daily life, and then find ways that all of these things can kind of be cohesive, generally I just find you're happier and you have more momentum in your life.
Okay.
But I too, it's the connection to the past is a big thing with me personally. And
What?
I guess classic in general, not to interrupt you, but
No,
just
no.
for me, are things that have stood the test of time. And generally, things that stand the test of time can hang around for a long period of time. They're probably not indefinite, but they hang around a lot longer than just passing fancy, so to speak, is because there's something about them that I don't know, that it just enriches our lives, and there's just something right about them. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what that thing is because it can mean a lot of different things depending on what you're talking about. But that's kind of in a rambling kind of nutshell what classic is.
Okay. So my next question to you is, you talk about things that have withstood the test of time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is it that, or is it more a sense of nostalgia for a bygone era? And this is why I ask, because one could easily argue that these things that we like, for example, just as one example, classic menswear, hasn't really stood the test of time. You look at the status quo of how people dress today, and by and large, it's not like this.
True. Well, I would say from an aesthetic point, it's if you dress in a classic style versus fashion. I think you got to bring in fashion,
Mm-hmm.
which tends to, I tend to, subscribe to kind of Alan Flusser, one of the authors you brought up in one of your prior videos. His idea or ideas a lot as far as clothing goes. A lot of it is it's just proportions.
Mm-hmm.
That if you get the right proportions, aesthetically, it's just going to look right on you, no matter what time period you're in. And that to me, that's a big difference. Like fashion tends to play on those things. They exaggerate or they minimize this and that. And in order to create different looks, which catch the eye, but they're always changing. And that's where I say like classic style and clothes, even though a lot of people may not choose to dress this way, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, you can't deny that somebody who's dressed in a classic manner, whenever you look at them, they look good.
They look correct.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
look correct. I mean, that may not be your style per se, but you can't deny that, yeah, it looks correct.
I
And that's
agree.
why I think people, the more formal, I mean, formality is largely, been slowly rolled back overall in society through time. But still, on more formal occasions, I mean, what you and I consider just dressing, a lot of people to them, that's dressing up. That they're going to try to look more correct
Mm.
out of,
Yeah.
reverence for the formal event, so to speak.
And, going back to Flusser, and I have a feeling that this won't be the last time we mention him. One of the things I like about him is that he distills menswear down to what he deems are irrefutable postulates, meaning menswear, correct menswear, uh, doesn't allow for opinion because it is based on two major facets. One is proportion, which is geometry, which there's no opinion, it's math. The other is color theory, same thing. There's no room for opinion in color theory. If you get proportion and color correct, you will look good no matter what, style of shoe is in this season, right? So that's what drew me initially to Flusser. Um, it's also, and it's interesting to me because he has such a disdain for the fashion world, but he uses the word fashion quite a bit. In fact, the full title of his latest book, Dressing the Man, The Art of Permanent Fashion, I really wish that he just said permanent style instead, because to me, it really muddies the issue. And I have this conversation with the guys at work all the time. Without naming names, there are guys I work with who follow the fashion world. And then there are ones who don't, and then there are a couple in between, whatnot. But it was really funny when one of the things, when I started working with certain types of clients who I sometimes think might react well to this, I tell them, I don't know the first thing about fashion. I don't care about fashion. I don't read fashion magazines. Like, sometimes I'll actually look on fashion blogs for comic relief, but that's not actually what I do at all. It's a completely different world. It's like fishing in architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the only thing that they have in common is that they both use textiles, right? What I do is I try, as a clothier, to always hone in and reach that ideal of a timeless style. And, this comes up with wedding couples often. They'll start talking about, outfits which might be a little bit outlandish, which is fine. It's their wedding. And ultimately, if that's what they decide, I will put them into whatever clothing they want. But I tell them, it's not just about looking good on the day of your wedding. It's equally, if not more important, to look good in the photographs 30 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to achieve that through fashion.
Mm-mm.
In fact, that is probably the best way to ensure that you will look silly decades later in the photos.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
I mean, yeah, going back to, not that we're just promoting Mr. Flusser in this, but going back to that idea that if you get the colors and the proportions right, you're always going to look, correct. Good is, it's a little subjective.
Right.
You're going to look correct. But, that fashion plays on messing with those things.
Right.
And if you want to, take it to the logical extreme, that's how you make a clown. That you take proportions way out of bounds for the body that's wearing them,
And
and you
color
do
too.
the same thing with color.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do bright, primary, just extremes in colors. You want like a lot of contrast and
That's an excellent
this and
point.
that. Yeah, that's how you create a clown. Is that you just you take further what fashion is doing, and you just take it more to an extreme, and eventually it'll look more and more ridiculous. But fashion kind of plays it. It takes what's correct and it plays within a range on these proportions and colors in order to create different looks, which in a time might look good to people, to a lot of people. But through time, the whole point of fashion is because it's not technically correct, that they can change the proportions and they create a different look, which doesn't look right today to people because the new look has exaggerated or minimized some other part of the look. And
Mm-hmm.
you just look out of date. But classic proportions and classic style, you're always going to look correct through time. And that's why it's so important, to develop an understanding of it. And that's one of the main things why, like, whenever I buy clothes or look at clothes, that's what I'm looking at is, does this look correct? For me,
Mm-hmm.
I do play, a little bit with things, but overall I try and stay within a safe range, so to speak.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, okay, speaking to that, as a, menswear shopper, as a menswear consumer. And this, of course, I personally have some insight to, because you've graciously bought a fair amount of clothing from me. Um, you are an unusual client in the sense that you know what you want. And if you're asking me for input, it's not because you need guidance. It's because we're having a conversation about clothes, right? And you come into the shop and you basically just kind of where everything is, and you more or less help yourself. And then at the end of it, I ring you up. My question is, do you have a general kind of MO when it comes to shopping, or a set of MOs? Meaning, are you trying to fill holes in your wardrobe, perceived holes? Are you simply looking for something that speaks to you and grabs you? Do you usually have predetermined ideas of what you might be looking for on any given outing to a menswear store? Like, what's your general approach in clothes shopping?
Well, it's evolved a little bit through time. A lot of that's just because, like, you and I got to know each other. And while I've always been interested in clothing, I was still, until like you and I met and started having more conversations on it, I learned a lot from you, which was very important. I mean, you know a lot about clothing. Um, some of it, I already knew and I had an idea, but I did learn quite a bit from you, and still do. Just in our conversation, something new will come up. And I think through time, um, what's happened, I guess, how do I describe this? I think everybody should find someone, if they're interested in classic style, somebody that is dressed, that they admire the way they dress, but they're dressed in classic style. Um, for me, that person was Cary Grant, as you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
He always, to me, I mean, obviously he was just a handsome person, which always helps,
Goes a
but
long way.
yeah, I mean, that's why he's a movie star. But his style was, when he was younger, and you do see pictures of him, or I mean, you look at stuff and you're kind of like, well, that looks a little bit more fashiony. But what you notice is through time, overall, he developed a very classic, understated style. And his style in the beginning was my anchor.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I would go into like Capra uh, and shop for clothes, because it's real easy to get overwhelmed when you walk in, especially if you really don't know what you're looking for. You just are trying to look good, but you don't know a lot about clothing. You get overwhelmed, and it's real easy to get led astray. And it's not until after you've made a purchase that you look back on it and you realize, well, while I might like that, that wasn't what I was going for. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have to everyone will make these mistakes if they're in this. But that's where, if you find somebody that's dressed in classic style that you admire, and in the beginning you can adhere to, does this look like something that person might wear? It kind of anchors you and helps you navigate in the beginning what to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And once you start to amass a wardrobe, that's when you can start playing. You need to kind of like, I mean, we could have a whole conversation on the basics of what everybody should buy probably up front. But somebody who's really interested in classic style and building a wardrobe because they want to dress this way through time, it's not just for a single event, maybe. That's where having that anchor person to kind of guide you in the beginning, so you don't go too off the deep end in a direction that you realize, okay, I need to pull back and go another way. That'll help you. You obviously have something in common. If you like the way they're dressed, you may never have met this person, but if you like the way they're dressed, there's something in the way you think about clothing, at least, that's probably in common. And if you follow that, then the more you learn about clothing, the more you walk into a menswear store, the more you'll learn, where do I need to go in the development of my personal style. So that's kind of, I don't know if that is
Oh, no, no.
clear on how.
Oh, absolutely it is.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
try to add to that from the clothier perspective, you know, much like in your profession, you can't just give the same haircut to everyone. It is your job to listen to your clients and provide the
Mm-hmm.
service that they're looking for. One of the things that I say time and time again is that I don't consider myself to be in sales whatsoever. I'm in client services, and with clients like you, it's really just mostly facilitating what they're telling me they want. Uh, Most of my other clients aren't like that. They come to me specifically for guidance. And at that point, it's very, very important for me to at first do a lot of listening and not so much suggesting, before I feel confident enough to start making suggestions that are within the client's comfort zone. They will fulfill the requirements that the client has, because a lot of times uh, when people walk into Capra Cavelli or any place like it, like a nice specialty menswear store, they're there for a reason. Some people don't at first buy their day-to-day clothing at places like that. Very often they need a suit for a wedding, a funeral, a job interview, things like that, or they have to go to an event with a very specific dress code and they don't even know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's my job to decipher what it is that they need and provide it. So much like you made an excellent point in finding some kind of fashion anchor, finding a person who you admire and you think looks good, and then keeping that style and those set of parameters in mind when you go into a place that can be overwhelming. It will certainly keep you grounded until you develop a stronger sense of self and you can start experimenting outside of those lines. I would say it's equally important to find a clothier who really has your best interest at heart. And they're not just trying to make a sale. There are salespeople, and then there are clothiers. And a clothier, to me, is a lifetime career with decades-long commitments to my clients. If someone comes to me the first time and says, "Oh, I need a suit for a job interview," great. I want to do my best to get them into an outfit that will make them look great and inspire confidence both in themselves and the people that they're interacting with. But then it is my goal also for that person to say, "Hey, you know what? I think this guy did me right, not because it's his job, but because he really wants people to dress well."
Yeah.
And much like you've got a mechanic and a barber and a shoe guy, right? I think having a good clothier is just really, just another person you have in your corner that is looking out for you. And I think you'll appreciate this more than most, because you appreciate this sort of thing more than most. Very few people, I think, today have a resource for, let's say you get a phone call, it's like you got a last minute invite to a wedding and the wedding colors are, blush pink, and you need a blush pink tie. There are people who know who to call and people who don't. You know?
That's right. That's it.
So to me, it's very much a
Uh,
client-driven profession, you know, and I think that that's one of the things that whether it's at the forefront of your mind or not, I don't know, but I think it's one of the things that appeals to you because you are very much a service-minded individual in your own line of work that I
uh,
think it attracts you elsewhere as well. I don't know if you
oh
could speak to that or not, but I just get
no,
that sense.
yeah, you're right. It is one thing you touched on. It's important to find somebody that's not just selling clothes. It's not just a job to them where the job that they're doing right now is they've got to sell clothes. I mean, obviously, everybody who's engaged in business, they have to, bring revenue in, otherwise the business doesn't survive. But you don't want to find somebody where their whole aim is merely to try and sell a bunch of clothes. That's
Mhm.
like, the short-term game never works in the long run. You've got to establish relationships that were of trust, where people trust you, and because you're trying to learn them and what they want, you may not get it right off, but the more you're willing to listen to them and get their feedback, and to be a good read of people in general, the better you get at helping people guide them to where they want to be,
For sure.
in clothing or in what I do, and cutting hair. Um, it I had another point I was going to make there. I forgot what it was, but
Well, we can circle back to it if it comes back to you. Just throw it in whenever you like. What I wanted
well,
to.
and it is important. Another thing I'll bring up just real quick is how um, another reason that is so important, especially nowadays, is, and I know this is getting a little bit technical probably for people who may not be, uh, extremely far along in their journey with clothes, as we like to think of it. But what you and I think of in clothes, um, those are clothing. What most people think of clothes is just this wide array of just things you cover your body with.
Mhm.
But tailored clothing is, in the clothing world, clothing. And then there's
Correct.
sportswear.
That's right.
And then there's, you could say there's, uh, work clothing, um,
Uniforms and
uniform, or just more durable fabrics that were their original intention was to be used in, mainly for manual labor of some kind. Not
uh,
that your job was manual labor,
denim
but
jeans are a perfect example of that. That started
right,
off that way, but then actually made their way into sportswear.
right. And like, t-shirts, to somebody who's more advanced in clothing, you're going to start to see a t-shirt that's underwear.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
garment that was designed
yeah.
to be worn under clothing, to protect clothing, just from
Well,
your
I
body.
mean, you know as well as
Um,
I do that.
but nowadays, most people, I think, would think of that as that's just clothing. It's all, in other words, what I'm trying to get at is a lot of people today, because through time, people have grown up not around people who were accustomed to dressing every day, to where your clothing, what you and I think of as clothing, tailored clothing, was their clothes. They grew up in a world where just everything was referred to as clothes, and
True.
that lack of distinction makes it very important to have somebody who is interested in clothing to help guide you, because you just didn't grow up with it. A lot of people, I should say, nowadays did not grow up with it, and that's why it's so overwhelming. If you grew up in a household where you had a father, or just the male members of your household, or your relatives were always dressing, you would just naturally learn more about it. And especially if your parents were making you dress that way too growing up, just the experience of always being around it, you learn more. But a lot of people nowadays didn't have that experience, And that's why whenever they approach the tailored clothing world, it's just overwhelming because, they're just coming at it for the first time basically. And there's so many fabrics, there's so many color combinations, there's so many like little details, learning how to tie knots. Um, it's
Hmm.
just can be overwhelming. And that's why they need somebody like you who's willing to listen to them, help guide them so they don't have to learn the hard way through experience. They can learn through somebody else's experience. And it's not that they can't do what they want. You're just there to kind of help point out, well, you can do that. However, that's not traditionally how that garment would have been worn.
Sure.
Um, I think that to me, that's what's important about classic style is you try and at least go back and have an understanding. Everything in classic style basically originated out of military dress or some kind of sporting activity in men's clothing, at least. And it's important to understand that all of these garments originally had a function. They were originally designed to be worn a certain way, and through time, it's all been mixed together and different things have been tried. But the more you have that base understanding, the better you are at learning how to mix and match things without looking ridiculous. And that's where, somebody like you or somebody who is interested in clothing and knows what they're talking about can help guide you so you don't make blunders and look ridiculous in certain company. And that's really the whole point. It's like, why are you buying these clothes? Are you just wanting to express your own personal style? Well, that's one thing versus you're buying these clothes because you need to look a certain way among a certain group of people. Well, then it's very important to have somebody who knows what they're talking about. Otherwise, you can look ridiculous and then you won't trust that person. You won't want to go back to them
Hmm.
because you're going to feel like they led me astray and I didn't feel comfortable.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So,
So, you know, I have a whole list of, well, a whole list, a few other topics that I would like to discuss, but looking at the time, I feel like your last statement is a really good place to kind of end things thematically, especially considering that now that the shelter-in-place order has been extended until May 8th. I would like to maybe just throw out the idea that we do this again and explore other topics at other times so that we don't have these like super long videos that we're putting out. So maybe we'll do this again in like a week or so.
no, that sounds good. I know that's what it's such a nuanced and deep topic. That's what makes it so fascinating. That's why I think, just to end on this, that's one thing about classic style is it's not boring. I mean,
No,
once
no.
you start learning about it, I
Oh
mean,
no.
yeah, you can go on and on. You can learn as much about it as you want, and
Hmm.
that's what keeps it. You know, that's what keeps it new for you, and that's what makes it so interesting, and why it's so enriching to your life. The more you get into it. And it doesn't I think a lot of people, you can make it as expensive or inexpensive as you want to be.
That's true, and that's actually one of the topics that I'd like to discuss in an upcoming episode.
Yeah.
Uh, because to me, the one of the tenets of the classic lifestyle is quality over quantity, right? But we don't have to get into that now. Um, Russell, thank you very much. This was really, really fun, and definitely for me fulfills a bit of a social need because we're all kind of cooped up. Um, but we'll sign off and have a great night, sir. I will be in touch about doing this again very soon.
Sounds good.
All right.
All
Have a
right.
good
Well,
one.
uh-huh.